right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session of the week. We're glad you could make it. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lindsay Boucher. I work with Sierra Club Canada Foundation. We are a partner of this conference, and I'll be your moderator today. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Farmland Drainage and the Environment Conference. So the primary organizer, the Citizens Environmental Alliance, they're an organization that was created to address the issue of farmland drainage in Saskatchewan. And SIA has collaborated with other like-minded organizations to bring you the series of webinars in this conference. So today we are hearing from Jeff, and he will be presenting an update on the status of farmland drainage and the environment and wetland policies in Saskatchewan. So we look forward to your talk, Jeff. And before I introduce him, I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge the numerous treaties across Saskatchewan. So that includes Treaty Number 2, Treaty 4, Treaty 5, Treaty 6, Treaty 8, and Treaty 10. And Saskatchewan is the ancestral home of the Plains Cree, the Saulteaux, Nakota, Assiniboine, Dakota, Lakota Sioux, and the Deniswanan people. So Saskatchewan is also the traditional home of the Métis Nation. Oops, I'm just getting a bit of feedback there. But yeah, I would like to acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked this land for centuries. And I guess working in the conservation movement, we know that Indigenous people are very important in terms of ongoing conservation efforts. And of course, as it relates to water as well, they are playing an important role. For the Farmland Drainage and the Environment Conference, just a bit of background information. This came out of the Farmland Drainage Roundtable workshops in Saskatoon in 2018. And so that workshop really kind of kickstarted a lot of conversations in Saskatchewan around farmland drainage. And one of the main outcomes of that conference was the Incentrix report. And the conclusion there was for a need for education communication. And that was kind of the seed that sparked this series of webinars. And we had an in-person conference in 2019 as well. All right, so without further ado, just a couple housekeeping notes for this presentation. Your mics will be on mute. And we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the question box on your dashboard as we go. And I am just realizing, sorry, you guys, you'll have to give me a minute or two. I do not have Jeff's bio in front of me right now. So sorry about that. Give me 1 second and I will pull that up. I hope you guys are all staying warm. I know we got hit by a lot of snow. Hopefully you guys are doing well as well. All right, thank you for being patient with me. So I assume many of you guys know Jeff Olson. He is a retired public servant of 36 years in the environmental field. And of course, he's the managing director of the Citizens Environmental Alliance. So I assume that you guys are familiar with him. But for those who aren't, Jeff has an extensive knowledge surrounding farmland drainage and wetland loss. He was a conservation officer stationed throughout Saskatchewan, and he was also a wetland specialist in the Parkland ecoregion. And for the last 14 years of his career, a watershed planner with the Water Security Agency. So as I mentioned, Jeff is the founder of the Citizens Environmental Alliance, and this is a group of concerned forward-thinking citizens working on innovative solutions to contemporary environmental problems. So he holds a recognized environmental professional designation in the natural resource management and is principal in Mind's Eye Consulting, which is based out of Saskatchewan, which is involved in watershed management, environmental law enforcement, and presently environmental issues in Saskatchewan. So Jeff also ranches in the Beaver Hills area, just west, in west central Saskatchewan. All right, so without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Jeff.
Hello, thank you, Lindsay. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, there's a bit of an echo, but we can hear you clear.
Okay, we'll just get into it. Many of you would have seen some of this presentation previously, or parts of it, and there's worth repeating. That's why we're going to be bringing it up, and there will be a lot of new information about what's going on here in Saskatchewan. So how much farmland in Saskatchewan is being drained? The estimates are between 1.6 and 2.4 million acres. Most of that, 95 to 99%, is unapproved illegal drainage. Estimates are 100,000 to 150,000 quarter section. So some of the thoughts around farmers have the right to drain. That's a myth. There is water belongs to the Crown, and you're required to have an approval. Bottom line is that it's a public benefit for everyone, and therefore just no one person should control that, even if it's on their particular parcel of land. Wetlands provide many ecological goods and services. Farmland drainage impacts are done to our environment by many ways, and they impact people and communities. Other landowners are flooded downstream, and communities are impacted. Roads are taken out and highways. Farmland drainage is not a benign sort of activity on the land. And the biggest thing is people concentrate on the fact that it's a habitat issue all the time. Well, it's a lot more than just habitat. As you can see in the St. Granger area, the amount of wetland loss from 1974 from farmland drainage, it's 90% of the areas already lost. And you can see the significant changes in the landscape there with the aerial photography and maps. As this last fall was a fairly open and early harvest, the opportunity for additional draining was carried out throughout the province. I noticed in many areas, it's not only the drainage of wetlands, but also the removal of the bush and breaking of native prairie associated with it, and it's not slowing up any. And in fact, this last fall, it's considerably bad. Part of the new drainage is even includes adjacent to Wildlife Habitat Protection Act land. It would have been impacting, and nothing you can do about that. Talking about Quill Lake's problem with the flooding there, 90,000 acres flooded, some cropland and some pastures. Even after many years of drought, the lake still remains fairly high. It's been going down slowly but surely. There's still an enormous amount of illegal drainage contributing to the lake every year, and additional drainage occurred in 2021. It is predicted that the lake will rise again with an average runoff, and it appears with the snow we have and the additional snow that we're even getting today is going to see the lake go up. In 2016, the regulatory agency, the Water Security Agency, said that they would not permit any more drainage, and the existing drainage needed to be closed. They have tried a few activities to get the landowners control, but have been very unsuccessful. And the most they have is 22 acres that have been closed as a result of their enforcement activities. So in that area, in 2018, there was a number of complaints that were made out. WSA sent letters to the landowners telling them that their ditches needed to be closed. Over the last 3 years, there was no compliance of any type. And then in 2022, when the minister was asked if they would be taking or doing anything about it, he said they won't be doing any action on the illegal drains. The Quill Lakes Watershed Association has come forward with a plan to lower the lakes by what they term a channel restoration through the Petawagan Lakes area and into Last Mountain Lake. This is already was proposed as a drainage ditch, and there was problems with First Nations getting a court order to be consulted properly, and concerns regarding water quality downstream. And based on that, they had to stop their development. Now that they are believing it's going to be a restoration, they're looking at going ahead with that in the next a while. One of the producers in the Quill Lakes area has actually come forward with a proposal that wetlands less than 3 acres don't need a license in that area. 3 to 5 acres can be drained, but they have to offset with existing habitat, whether wetlands, bush, or grass, a ratio of 3 to 1, and that 5 acre and larger will need the land control. The trouble with all that is that there'll be more water drained into the Quill Lakes and continuing the flooding, not lessening it. There's a good portion of the water coming off the land is from those smaller wetlands, and this effective drainage area being increased. It also ignores the total cumulative impacts of draining wetlands. The person who said that if we wanted to have an incentive for landowners, that he could see landowners needing to be paid $10,000 per acre not to drain wetlands. So now we'll talk about the Blackbird Creek Drainage Network. It was a result of a network complaint that they started the network in that area. All the wetlands in the area were done illegally without any licensing. Actually, the Water Security Agency was taken in court by the landowner as a result of their inactivity or not answering to the problems that were being made, and the court ordered the WSA to take action. They tried to close the drainage works, and some of it was, but not all the affecting drainage works were closed. Then the Provincial Conservation Development Authority, or the SCDA, and local landowners tried to form a C&D to expropriate that complainant from the process, and thereby not have to license it because the complaint went away. But 12 years later, the ditches still remain open and new illegal drainage continues. In the Blackbird Creek network, the gross drainage area is almost 20,000 acres. The historic effective drainage area is about a quarter of that, 5,000 acres. But with the new drainage, that new effective drainage area is going to be 17,500 acres, about 91% of the gross area, which is the 350 increase. And there'll be almost 3,500 acres of wetlands that are impacted in that area. Another drainage network that is of concern was in the Saline Creek area in Invermay. Again, it was the network came about as a result of a drainage complaint from a downstream landowner who was being flooded out almost every year. All the wetlands upstream of the drainage has been done illegally, and that was contributing the majority or nearly all of the water and problems for him. The proposal by the Water Security Agency was to install reducer culverts to slow the water up, but any other type of mitigation to the loss of wetlands or the values that they contribute was not in the actual proposal. The end result, though, landowners refused to comply in 2020, and this drainage network is just at a standstill right now. The drainage remains open, and the downstream landowner is still getting flooded. This is a drainage channel downstream near Saline Lake that would have been built to accommodate more flows, and as far as we know, it's still illegal. And this was new drainage works in the fall of 2021 at Saline Creek Network, a major stream network here that was going through cultivated field that the person was cultivating. We have some proposals in the Cupar and Stony Creek area. They are quite significant in size. We haven't seen the estimations of how much actual wetlands will be impacted and that sort of thing, but there is about 190,000 acres of water that's, land that will be drained by these networks. One of the newest ones we just found out about a month ago is an area in the Kelvington area under the work with the Kelvington Conservation Development Authority. Their networks, 4 networks covering almost 500,000 acres, 10 times larger than the city of Regina. Licensing existing and new drainage. One of the interesting parts is if it was just existing, that would be one thing, but in the majority of these cases, in these networks, it's trying to take out or open as much new farmland as can practically be done. And there's similar projects throughout Saskatchewan taking place. We don't know of all of them. The Water Security Agency isn't being very forthright in bringing forward information regarding that. Unless we do a Freedom of Information Act request, they normally don't tell us anything. And if you do a request like that, it costs money for them to give you the information. On all these networks, none have been identified for any type of environmental assessments, either federally or provincial, by the Saskatchewan Environment or by the Federal Environment Department. One of the questions that kind of came up is whether or not the conservation development authorities have actually too much power in the province. They have the ability to form with only 2/3 of the landowners in favor. They levy taxes to all the landowners for the drainage projects, even those who want wetlands on their land and not benefiting from drainage. I'm a perfect example. I have a cattle operation, and my pastures need the water for both grazing and the water source for the cattle. And if the drainage project came by me, I'd be required to pay, even though I would want to keep my water as much as I can. It wouldn't matter. One of the things that P&Ds can do is they can expropriate land for streams and wetlands that they potentially want to drain. I got a phone call from an individual landowner who told me that he would lay a complaint against the upstream landowners, yet for the fact that if they then formed a C&D, they would expropriate his land, and he didn't want that. So he's scared of them being able to take his land away, essentially, for complaining. The conservation development authorities do not or are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, so they're not really transparent. We've asked for information regarding how much they're spending and some of their plans, and they just ignore our requests. They also receive significant provincial government grants and subsidies, and even federal government money at times. So one of the things is, where are we at with the Water Security Agency? They are an agriculturally based organization or agency of the province now, essentially an offshoot of the agricultural department, because they're looking after the agriculture, and a lot of the other things they do are just the sideline, looking after the dams in the province and that sort of thing. So the performance measures are geared towards the agricultural side of it. Right now, they've had that switch in the last few years, but there's no measure of acres of wetlands conserved. And the question is, when Water Security Agency or the Watershed Authority, when they first came about, they were to be a balanced approach between agricultural and the water management in the province, including concerns about the environment. And in fact, the Water Security Agency is the representative on the North American Waterfowl Management Program in North America, and they're to be looking after habitat, and that role has really fell by the wayside in a lot of ways. So they're providing major support to the drainage networks in the province with a lot of money to training for the qualified person, and they're presently working on 20 drainage networks. They've invested over $1 million in demonstration and research projects. The interesting part of that is much of the research is already been done, and we know what the impacts in a lot of ways are, but they continue to do more research and not provide any funding for mitigation and that sort of thing. They're looking at the soil carbon values. They finally recognize that wetlands are important carbon sinks, and may hold a answer to some of the problems that we have with the climate change. And they're looking at nutrients again, recognizing that this drainage has impacts to water quality with downstream addition of phosphorus and nitrogen, as well as other ag chemicals that come with the runoff. They looking at various stewardship practices that the landowners could do to improve that. One of the things is they still have a complaint process that we talked about before that has been really not very successful or useful. There had some changes in it. I'm not sure if it helped much. They still tell the person draining as a violator who complained, and they essentially act as a mediator instead of a regulator. They have laws that could have people or drainers taken to court, but they really don't have an enforcement or compliance arm within their agency that actually can take anyone to court. I think they want to use the conservation officers for that, but that hasn't really worked out very well. There is some conservation officers in the province that would like to enforce more of this, but they're under direction not to do anything unless Water Security Agency advises them to, and even when it's brought to their attention, Water Security Agency has a number of times told them to ignore it. So essentially, they have a lot of different things going on. And their biggest thing with wanting to do is licensing. And this was something that was noted when the ag management strategy came out initially, was they're attempting to license all these and are, but without any type of environmental mitigation that would assist in the loss of the values or impacts from what's going on. So they've started approvals and have approved a number of areas. They've also provided money to the Saskatchewan Conservation Development Association to help with it. There was funding to one conservation and development area of over $4 million for their project. And we can't find out all the areas, or don't see where they are on how much money totally they have given. In 21 and for this year, they have dedicated over $2 million to what they call channel clearing. There's a difference of opinion what channel clearing and what drainage ditching is. The Provincial Auditor did a follow-up report to her initial report of a couple of years ago, and it shows the same problems that have always been there. WSA needs to develop policies on wetlands and assess the risk of drainage works. They need to develop a prioritization plan, which they haven't done yet, to attack high-risk drainage areas where there's major impacts to people, property, or the environment. And they need to report to the public on the regulation of the drainage on agricultural land, on how much enforcement do they actually do or are accomplishing. One of the positive notes is that we are having the public recognize that this drainage is a major impact to the environment and to people, therefore. And the municipalities of Saskatchewan, which used to be SUMA, have brought forward a couple of resolutions at their annual meeting. One is to develop a wetland policy comparable to Alberta and Manitoba, and the other one is to provide quarterly water quality test results from lakes and rivers, and provide that information and be transparent on it. Another aspect of it is attention coming in even the legislature. There was a number of citizens in the province that brought forward a petition and was brought to the legislature to ask for a comprehensive wetland policy to be developed. One of the questions that come up is, how do we compare with Alberta and Manitoba, which both have written policies, and the first session in the drainage conference was Alberta and Manitoba going through their respective policies earlier in the week, and that you can look at that on our YouTube channel. I'll give you more about that later, but essentially it's a real balanced approach about wetlands and conserving them and managing them for all the benefits they provide. In Saskatchewan, essentially the goal is for responsible agricultural drainage, and no mention of wetland conservation or dealing with that. Some of the examples of past wetland mitigation that we've over the years had, we've seen the twinning of Highway Number 1. There was loss of habitat, about 78 hectares, and 20 acres was compensated. Even a lot of this is in highway work. That's the all-weather roadway that was going to be developed between Stony Rapids and Fond du Lac. There was to be a no net loss. One of the things we see is the city of Saskatoon taking a leadership role and actually putting in a wetland policy of their own to recognize and see that the wetlands are preserved and integrated within their planning processes. Against more highway type mitigation, wanting to achieve a no net loss of function. You'll notice about all these, they are either urban municipalities or highways or industry. And I know the forest industry as well considers and mitigates for wetland loss. It's only the agricultural that are not made to comply with the laws or have any type of mitigation for the majority of the work that goes on. So as I mentioned before, Blackbird Creek, they were going to require flow controls, so they would not cause downstream flooding, but there was no other mitigation that was going to happen. So in all the quarter sections that they've approved between 2014 and 19, all of them have been done without any wetland retention as a condition of their approval. So the Watershed Authority, the Water Security Agency, proposed in the fall of 2020 to have a wetland policy, and they brought it out and consulted. One of it was that there would be 50% of the wetlands would be retained as a condition of licensing. They were finally recognizing that the wetlands were important to all Saskatchewan people, and protecting them was in the best interest. They proposed by mitigating wetland losses with offsets from forages and pasture lands. I'll get into that a little bit. But there was a lot of pushback from from some farmers, and their lobbying resulted in the policy essentially being scrapped. So the wetlands policy included the protection of uplands as mitigation, or creation of wetlands through dugouts and impoundments, but even those impoundments they were allowed to be later cultivated and seeded if they wanted to. They weren't to be left as aquatic vegetation or anything. There was a question, or there was a proposal that they would be compensated at that they would pay an offset fee of $100 an acre per year. And nobody knew exactly what was going to happen to that pot of money. Would it go into the general coffers, or whether to be, going to protect wetlands in other areas? Until a provincial wetland policy becomes approved, all the licensed drainage in the province will not be mitigated except for high flows and potential sediment control. The Saskatchewan Farm Stewardship Association actually, who believe in managing the water on their individual landowners' parcels. This was their proposed wetland conservation policy that they took out to their members. One of the things they said is the point of running a business is to make a profit, and I would suggest that is the first thing that they think of. They discussed various mitigation options with their members. One, they would like to see that it only applies to new drainage, so all existing drainage would not require anything. They talk about set-asides of 3 to 6 acres per quarter section. That could include grasslands, wetlands, and uplands. Potential, they thought about 25% of historic wetlands being retained. No mitigation except for species at risk, at the highest level of threatened wildlife, fish and plant life in Saskatchewan, which would mean there wouldn't be much mitigation. They also looked at exempting the ephemeral and temporary wetlands, except for new drainage. The ones that are greater than 5 acres, which would not be the majority of wetlands, would be conserved, including lakes, I guess. And they always mention about, it's a habitat issue that they're really looking at, and that's farthest from the truth. The fact is that it's more than habitat. It's all the other aspects of benefits that we get from wetlands that are even of concern. Question is, should uplands be used to mitigate wetlands? I see it as an apples and oranges sort of thing. I don't know why people, agencies, governments, and even some conservation agencies want to say conserving, if we lose a wetland, conserving a native prairie or aspen forest or other types of uplands is okay, or that sort of thing. And to us, they're very different, and they provide us with different ecological goods and services. So we don't see that trade-off should be made. Despite having not having a wetland policy and recommendations from the auditor, we continue to license without any wetland policy. Water Security Agency has set a date to have the wetland policy in one by 2024, which, as far as we're concerned, there should be a moratorium on any new licenses until there's a watershed or sort of wetland policy in place. And the thought is WSA is going to come out with and consulting in this year and next. So as we see it, the agriculture water management strategy itself is the greatest threat to Saskatchewan's waters, wetlands, and natural resources. All the licensing of all this drainage is without mitigation and without proper risk assessment about what it's going to cause, not only today, but for future generations. Thanks for listening, and just a couple saying there from Margaret Mead about how we can, as committed citizens, really make a difference in doing these things. My contact information. And I'll turn it back to Lindsay to look after the question and answer period.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Jeff, for that very informative presentation. Yeah, so for the next portion of the webinar today, we're going to have a Q&A as well as a discussion time. So how this is going to go, there's two options. You can either put your question in the chat box and I can read it out to Jeff. The other option is to use the raise hand function. And then you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly. So yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of information and folks are still processing that information. So as you guys do that, we'll start off with a question here. And yeah, feel free. I see some questions are already coming in. Thank you for that. Okay. Yeah, and of course, one of the key questions that we always get is, will this session be recorded? And the answer is yes. All these sessions are recorded and they are publicly available on the Citizens Environmental Alliance YouTube channel. And so they're going to be available after starting of next week. So, all right. So I'm just going to give you guys a couple more minutes to put your questions in. I'm sure we'll have a great discussion here. Yeah, so the first one is someone is asking, what can we do to have an impact on WSA's policy development? So you've talked a lot about, I guess the need for a wetland policy, and folks are kind of wondering, how can we be involved in this process or in this development if they're concerned about some of the stuff that's going on. So yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one to get us started.
Well, I think if you, as a group, if you've got concerns about that, bringing them to your elected officials is the way to do it. The bottom line is, as an individual and phoning your MLA, you can do that, but it just works better if you belong to an organization, whether it's a farm or environmental organization. And bring the issue forward there and get people to understand and raise the awareness so that the politicians who are making the decision can do something. As far as when the consultations will occur and where they'll be going, I don't know, and I haven't heard exactly when, but we'll be trying to advise people of those, hopefully open houses and that throughout the province when they come about.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and there's another question here actually just asking how the Citizens Environmental Alliance has been involved in the consultation processes and in policy development.
Yeah, although we phone into the WSA office and ask questions, we've not been asked whatsoever about it. I think they've been consulting with mostly agricultural groups and not environmental groups. they may have done a couple or a few environmental groups, but none that I'm aware of.
All right, thanks. All right, I see a couple of hands up here. So yeah, of course, there's a couple options. Just a reminder, if folks want to either raise their hand or put a question in the chat, those are two options available to you. So Orly, I see you have your hand up here, and I will unmute you. And all right, it just says here that, sorry, give me 1 second. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Lindsay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Jeff. This has been really, really helpful, and there's a lot of really important facts. And I think that it's important that they don't sit on the shelf and get dusty, that we need to make sure that this information gets out. One thing that I'm really concerned about, Jeff, is that we know that not having a policy is impacting all of our water in Saskatchewan, but it's also impacting development, especially in municipalities, and it's affecting how we develop. I know in the lectures we heard on Monday that Alberta and Manitoba, the rules apply to everyone. So it's highways, municipalities, cities, towns, industry. Do you think we'll ever get there?
I think that in the end, we're going to have to recognize that it doesn't matter if the wetlands within the urban setting, or whether it's in industry or the northern forest, or on agricultural lands, that we need to consider wetlands and the benefits they provide. And you're right, not only benefits to the environment, but economic benefits from good quality water and that sort of thing. So I think the overall provincial wetland policy should address all aspects of wetlands and wetland loss in the province. And I think we can get there.
All right, thank you. Thanks for that question, Orly. And in the chat here, someone's also, this is more of a comment, but yeah, for those who don't know, Saskatchewan has a 25-year Saskatchewan Water Security Plan, and there has been an updated kind of where they're at now report that was issued in 2020. And so they're just kind of making a note that that WSA has identified making a wetland policy is one of their objectives in that 25-year water security plan. And they've also kind of just noted that the completion date, that the target date that was initially issued for the completion of a wetland policy was actually 2015, and that the lead agency there is, of course, the Water Security Agency. And then, as we know, that still hasn't happened yet, and so we know that, yeah, I guess on WSA's side, that a wetland mitigation policy would be part of, sorry, a wetland mitigation policy kind of under the agricultural water management strategy would be part of an overall wetland policy for the province. So they kind of just put this question, or sorry, put this comment in the chat. But Jeff, I don't know if you have any comments that you'd like to make on this 25-year plan and kind of what the target date has been and where we're at now, and kind of the process that WSA has laid out there.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is it shows the complicated and wicked issue that this really is, that it's not a real easy concern to be dealt with. Getting the wetland policy, when I was with the Water Security Agency, I went through a few processes to develop a wetland policy, and there was always the need to balance the economic and development sort of mindset with the environmental mindset, and it almost seemed like the two weren't compatible. But the bottom line is that they should be, or they have to be, and that's where we're going to be able to develop this policy. I think that agricultural producers in general, including the ones that need to manage water on their farms, as well as the rest of the people of Saskatchewan, need to come together and assist with the development of this policy. I think that Water Security Agency developing it on their own, as they've tried in the past, isn't getting them anywhere, and they need to have a better way to develop the policy.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It is definitely a complicated and nuanced conversation there. And we do have a question in the chat, and I know, given that we've had a whole week-long series of webinars, I know that this question has come up and has been discussed throughout the week, but I still think it's very relevant here. So yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But someone has put in just a question about, private gains and public goods. So just again, this dynamic that we see with, agricultural producers retaining wetlands on their land, and how that is for the public good. But of course, there are private gains to be made if that wetland is drained. And so that is a dynamic that that we do see. And so I don't know if you want to provide any comments on that dynamic.
I guess the only thing would be is that we need to recognize that essentially is a major factor, is that there's public benefits to the wetlands and to having the natural landscapes that we have, and that landowners also need to be developing their land, but not at the expense of water quality downstream and that sort of thing. And essentially, a lot of times you're moving gaining a benefit and moving the cost to others, to your next door neighbor, or to the community that's being flooded, or to the RM that's getting their road washed away. So we need to get that accepted with the public and with the agricultural community.
Right. Yeah, and I guess the second part of this question as well, and this, yeah, I know that you've mentioned some compensations. I think you mentioned a statistic of $10,000 or something for an incentive for farmers to keep that on the land. But do you know if there's a plan for some compensation for farmers to make the sacrifice? Do you think that would be a way to meet folks halfway?
Right now, some of the different organizations, Ducks Unlimited would be one, as well as Lake Winnipeg Foundation are sending money to get landowners to conserve or restore wetlands on their land. The $10,000 an acre is sort of a way too much amount of money. We've looked at studies in the east central part of Saskatchewan in the late 90s, early 2000s that show that we can or should be able to acquire or protect wetlands with a lot less money than that. It's interesting question about, should we be paying landowners not to drain wetlands? And well, I'll leave it to society and the public to decide that. It may be the only way to address the issue in the short term, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. We'll pass on. A couple more people have their hand raised. So Lauren Scott, I see your hand is raised, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello? Oh, okay, sorry. I'm no good on computers, obviously. Jeff, thank you very much for the excellent summary, as depressing as it is. a few thoughts. It's interesting that Alberta and Manitoba have been able to move ahead on a comprehensive water management policy, not just focused on agriculture. As a former politician, I can only assume that the political climate is such that the urban people or the non-agriculture people are outnumber the producers at which to drain. And we have not reached that stage here in Saskatchewan. Also in Saskatchewan, trying to think of the word here, the desire by some individual landowners to drain it's very extreme. And this dates back to the 90s when I was Minister of Environment. I can truthfully say the most aggressive, insulting group of people I met with were landowner pro-drainers. And then subsequently, when I was called to witness in the court in Yorkton, there that same mentality was there. It's a sense of entitlement, and we need to overcome that. But I think that there's enough people, enough groups in Saskatchewan that we can get moving ahead with the comprehensive policy that looks far beyond farmer draining some land to make more money, and that's the only purpose. And if I've said to a number of these individuals, if you didn't want wetlands on your land, why would you buy it? And I told them I specifically bought land with wetlands in Aspen because I wanted it there, and I've since put a conservation easement on it. And they just shake their heads. So anyways, we can't give up, and we do have a network of various groups. That petition that was presented certainly shows widespread support for us and our cause to reduce, stop, and restore some wetlands.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, Lauren. One of the interesting parts, and starting to get into the discussion, I know the National Farmers Union was looking at, and that is the farm size that is gaining and getting greater and greater all the time. And you know, what are the economic pressures that are coming from the lenders and the fertilizer companies and the industry themselves outside the farmers to produce more and to have more land developed. And to the point we're seeing some of the largest landowners in the province lands being bought up by pension funds and by investment organizations or that sort of thing, and developing these land. They want acres that they can farm corner to corner, like in the Regina Plains, and they want that in the Yorkton area where it's prairie pothole, and it just doesn't work that well. So we're seeing a shift to even greater amount of wetland and natural habitat loss. So it's getting worse. It's not getting better.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Lauren, for those comments. And I also see that we have Lyle here with your hand up as well. So Lyle, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I can't hear him.
Yeah, we're not hearing you, Lyle, so you'll just have to unmute yourself there. Yeah, I see your hand up. Yeah, you'll have to unmute yourself, or else, I mean, you can always type your question and I can ask it, but give you a couple more seconds. All right. Lyle, we'll come back to you just in the meantime here. So We did have a comment that came in. I know that we were talking about, compensation for farmers, for keeping wetlands, which is a public good. We're talking about public good, private gains in that whole conversation. And someone wanted to just put a comment on that, with that discussion in mind, that, with the carbon markets coming in, this seems like it could be a good potential way for wetlands to be protected and for producers to get paid for, with regards to keeping wetlands on the land and having a carbon a benefit for keeping wetlands on the land, and there could be a profit maybe to be done there. So why not, if we are going to be taxed on emitting carbon, could there be maybe a flip side of an incentive for storing carbon on the land? So just wanted to share that comment with you all. Moving on, there's a couple questions here about the drainage networks. And so someone was asking, how can they find out where these networks, drainage networks are taking place? And you've provided an update here, but if someone wanted to, maybe if they're in an area that has a drainage networks, how can they stay up to date with what's going on with the drainage networks?
Yeah, that's a good question. You could ask your local water security regional office and that sort of thing. You might be a lot better off phoning your local rural municipality and asking them if they have heard or know of any drainage networks in their area. That might be the best way to find out. Or ask your local, RM representative. I guess if you're in an urban municipality, get to know somebody in the RM and just ask the question. As I said before, the C&D and the province is not being transparent with this information. They have 20 ongoing ones, and I don't think I can name half of them myself or know where half of them are. So they're really being secretive about this and for no good reason.
Okay, yeah. There's another question here kind of along these lines. So has there been any effort to address the secrecy of potentially the government, or maybe in some respects the C&Ds, by using independent entities? So for example, using remote sensing and reporting directly to the people. So they offer a couple examples, like the Global Institute for Water Security is doing one, it's something similar to what the Global Institute for Water Security is doing on COVID levels in the city's sewage systems. So yeah, I guess the question essentially is there anything, for more transparency using remote sensing and then the direct reporting to the public?
Yeah, that's a interesting question and insight into the issue. One of the interesting parts about getting wetland policy is the need for wetland inventory, and I know Water Security Agency and the I believe Ducks Unlimited has been assisting with that, and I'm hoping that with a wetland inventory they have the drainage inventory that goes along with that, and then we might be better able to see where the intensity of drainage is and that sort of thing, and be able to address it that way, or come to know of where the new networks are through that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Another question's come in just about, recognizing that we have dry seasons and wet seasons. So as we enter into a drier summer period in Saskatchewan, this person maybe is asking if the Saskatchewan government is perhaps hoping or thinking that the best strategy is to resist any change now and hope that the drainage problem will go away. Do you feel like, is it likely that the perceived drainage will need to go away?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, when we talk about governments and elected officials, they really work on a 4-year rotation, and nothing like they would like better than an issue would just magically go away. This is the type of issue that is going to continue on and on and on. The worst thing is to plan for a drought when there is a drought, and the worst thing is to mitigate for floods when there is a flood, and this issue carries with that. I don't think that the politicians of the day are going to address this in the short term. It needs to come higher in the level of public consciousness and be out there and really highlighted as a concern that it deserves.
Yeah, for sure. And so do you have any thoughts or recommendations how folks can get involved in that work?
Well, being a member of your local environmental group, and if they don't know that if this isn't on the radar, I noticed a couple groups that I don't think are there. We are providing or hoping to have a conglomeration of those groups to heighten the public awareness in the province. If all else, send me an email and I'll put you on the newsletter, on the SIA newsletter to provide updated information and maybe some of the best ways to get that. I think the longer term will be that even the public citizens are going to try to come up with a provincial wetland policy and with agriculture and urban and forest interests and all the industry and just everyone contributing to something that maybe everybody can live with, even if they can't like it all.
Right, yeah, for sure. And we have another question here just about, so compliance seems to have been a bit of a theme throughout your presentation, and how there's a need for more compliance and maybe enforcement of even just the current policies. Do you have any thoughts about, if we do have a wetland policy that will be implemented, how we can actually move the needle forward through actually having a policy that would be, enforced and complied with?
Yeah, that's right. Without some sort of compliance and enforcement arm, a lot better than what Water Security Agency has always had, it's going to be problematic. Because along with the policy comes the laws that essentially support the policy. The wetland policy will be there, and having to have a license to drain will be one of the tools that get to be used. I know that there was a discussion earlier in the week regarding enforcement not being the best tool, or in fact some people viewing it, we shouldn't look at that as a tool. But I have to say that it's much like a lot of issues. If you don't have the stick that goes along with the carrot, those that won't take the carrot will just do whatever they want. They want to have the freedom to do whatever on their own land or with their own things. We don't allow industry or anyone else to do that. If a potash mine owns land, we don't allow them to do whatever they wish. And agriculture is an industry the same way. So that's the bottom line.
Thank you. All right. So I have Lal's question here. Lal, thanks for being patient with us. So sorry we couldn't get you unmuted there. So his question is, at what point is the lack of enforcement of existing rules, let alone The further years of delay, and just the time that it takes for consultations is actually named as corruption. So also note that agribusiness should no longer be called farming. It is industrial extraction at the expense of ecosystems and the public purse. So I guess the question here, do you have any thoughts or comments on that statement, Jeff?
Yeah, the frustration has been that, initially when Saskwater was made in 1981, they were given regulations and they are the regulatory agency, continued on the Watershed Authority and the Water Security Agency. But in that time, and when I first started working with them in the mid-90s, they said, well, we have laws and regulations that could fine people up to $100,000. And, I never thought about it at the time, but I should have asked them, so how many people have you ever charged and gotten any type of fine, never mind 100,000? I finally did ask that, and I found that it was none, that they hadn't done any. And today, they have in the Water Security Agency very little compliance mechanisms. They don't have the policies and procedures. As I said before, as a past conservation officer, I can understand the need to protect the environment and speak for that which can't speak for themselves. And the bottom line is that conservation officers in the province recognize that, and they want to be in on that. There needs to be a political will that says we are going to use enforcement and compliance, including taking people to court as a means to counteract this major problem that we're having. And until that happens, that the political will is there, you'd swear they had it in the Quill Lakes once, in that they issued drainage closures or notifications that people would have to close their drainage works. But in the end, they never did anything about it. The provincial government, the Water Security Agency, didn't anything, nothing to have anybody close their drainage works. So compliance and enforcement is the other side of the carrot sort of incentive-based sort of thing, and it needs to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a comment here, maybe along the lines of political will, and just currently, someone put a comment about the Lake Diefenbaker project and how there's a lot of political support for irrigation projects, for damming projects, and this person was just expressing some concern over kind of the direction or some of the projects that we do see being supported quite widely. So there's another question here, and I guess it's again a bit more maybe of a comment, but is it true that the last year during drought that there was still lots of illegal drainage? However, at the same time, you saw that the crop insurance had a major payout for drought. So just kind of, seeing the two things in hand, that even during a year of drought, we still have lots of illegal drainage, but then you also have crop insurance paying out for drought. And just a comment saying, is the system broken? Do you have any thoughts on that, about that dynamic that we see playing out in the province?
Yeah, that's a good question or comment. I know when we initially looked, or the federal government made their federal wetland policy, they reviewed a lot of that sort of take on what was happening, subsidizing drainage equipment and crop insurance subsidizing, losing wetlands or for the drainage of wetlands and that sort of thing. So there is actually programs in place that are counter and go against keeping wetlands. And if they would come, and they've been identified, and I can't name them all, they've been identified already, or should be further looked at and identified, to then get the provincial government to change those programs so that so that they do not harm wetlands or do not go against wetlands, even in the way things are taxed and that sort of thing. I'm not sure at what rate the wetlands and native prairies and that are taxed, but they shouldn't be taxed the same as cropland and that sort of thing. So that all needs to be looked at. There is other ways to deal with this issue.
Thanks. Yeah, and someone has also put in the chat perhaps an idea about how for assistance in drainage works, for WSA's assistance in drainage works, that there's a requirement for wetland mitigation, and that could potentially be an incentive there, or a requirement that could act as the carrot, as what we've referred to in other presentations. So the carrot is being WSA's assistance for drainage network assistance for the drainage networks. All right, so I don't see any other hands up. We do have some more comments in the chat. Thank you all for the great discussion, and Jeff, we always appreciate your thoughts and perspectives. So there's a couple comments here. So one is, just again, considering what's happening in the world right now and what's happening in Ukraine. So just kind of noting just that with what's happening in the world, that could create more incentive for Saskatchewan wheat, and could incentivize even more production here locally. And I think this person is just expressing concern that we already have a lot of illegal drainage and a lot of drainage works, and that with pressure to produce more, that things could become worse. So yeah, that is a good comment there about what's happening in the world. Jeff, I don't know if you had any other thoughts to include there.
No, I don't. I think that's hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, great. So we do have a question. So just wondering, what other conservation or habitat groups does SIA work with and partner with in Saskatchewan?
Well, we partner with, and I'll talk about the conference supporters and collaborators. SIA isn't a programming conservation group. We are a advocacy and activist group, and we attempt to bring the spotlight on the issue more than anything. We have a multitude of different environmental organizations and other organizations, the First Nations and their organizations, that sort of thing. So it's really many, and we're going to be cooperating with many more over time.
All right, thanks. And yeah, just the last comment that we have here. So someone from the SFSA, so the Saskatchewan Farm Stewardship Association, thanks for joining us today. They put in a comment just about, I know that you've talked about the SFSA, and so yeah, the presentation definitely is from an environmental perspective, but if you guys want to learn more about, Saskatchewan agriculture, in general, landowners, drainage, best management practices, and their perspectives on care for the environment and social well-being, please do reach out to the SFSA, and they put their email here. So that's execdirector@saskfsa.ca. So of course, that's just a great reminder that yeah, you can always reach out and chat with them directly, and it seems like they would be happy to chat more if you have any questions that you would like to ask. And start that conversation. So that is all the questions that we have. Thank you guys so much for coming out, and again for the great conversation. I see here, yeah, folks are saying thank you in the chat. So yeah, Jeff, I will pass it over to you for closing remarks.
Okay, you'll let me share my screen. Okay, just want to wrap things up today by thanking our conference supporters and collaborators. There's a list of or showing the logos here, and that should be that. I want to talk about a recap that we had on the first day, a talk with Alberta and Manitoba agencies on their wetland conservation policies. We also had that night a talk from Branimir on why do we need more nature-friendly agriculture, and I think that was a real eye-opener when it comes to discussion around food production. We had a landowner rights and responsibilities panel to talk about farmland drainage and agriculture and what it means to people and really try to get to the root of what's going on. We then had Dr. Hayashi talk about tropical depressions and the importance they play in groundwater recharge and the effects of land management on them. And we heard from Sherry Clare yesterday regarding does drainage pay, showing in Alberta that it was really questionable on whether it did pay for everything in all situations, and coming up with a good idea that perhaps that same sort of research should be done in Saskatchewan to show whether it truly pays or not and how that would affect things. And again, today I did that presentation on the farmland drainage update. I want to thank the moderators and person behind the scenes, Jordan Ignatius from Nature Saskatchewan, Dr. Champs with Ducks Unlimited Canada, Kathy Hochlander from National Farmers Union, and last but not least, Lindsay Boucher from Sierra Club Foundation, Prairie Chapter. All the presentations will be on the Citizens Environmental Alliance Saskatchewan YouTube channel, and it's on the screen there, or you can just Google that, as they say, Google it. And if you want to stay informed, request the SIA newsletter by sending an email to the SIA Gmail address or through the SIA Facebook page. And with that, I would say thank you to everyone for attending the conference, and we look forward to one this fall.